experience with these two sessions that are happening this morning. My name is Kelley Ridings. I'm a school leader who I live in China. I live in Beijing. I'm a school leader, have been a head of school uh, throughout much of my career, as well as a school principal. I started as a high school history teacher and been doing this work for the last 30 plus years. I'm also an author. I've written 3 books on educational leadership, a couple of books about hiring, how you can help define how you can get jobs as an international educator in international schools, and also a book to help school leaders on how to hire using a method that I've developed called the gift hiring method. And then my newest book is coming out in just a few days. It'll be out on the 23rd, in fact. And that book is called The Growth Minded Educator. And it's about the growth mindset and how it helps educators to move through their careers with professional development and mentoring, and how it intersects with those things. So it's coming out in just a few days. So I'm pleased about that. And so I'm, of course, pleased to be here to help you in this master class and to be able to work in helping you to grow your careers. I see that some of you have put in the chat where you are in your career intentions, and so it's nice to be able to connect with you and to share with you. So let's get started then with the presentation. So as we go through this course, this particular session, there are 3 things that are going to be important that you will learn about. The first one is a framework about how you can go through the educational change process. Whether you're a school leader or you're a teacher, you are going to find change is going to happen throughout your education careers. And so how do you deal with educational change? Why does it happen? And how can you be effective in what you're doing? In addition, how do you work with innovation to be able to improve in what you're doing there? I'm not sure why this yellow, you see the yellow marks on the screen? Maybe I somehow have turned on an editing button. Oh, no, that's not. I don't know what I've done here. Not sure what that is. How do I get rid of that? Oh, gosh.
Kelley, I'd suggest you ignore that for now. I am trying to look for the host tool so that I can disable that function for participants.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that one, so I didn't know what that was. So I'll follow your advice there, Toyosi. So you're also, the second thing is the second objective of this particular session is that you're going to be able to consider how you can lead your peers and lead people who you work with in your schools to shape school culture through your influence, because this course is about identity and intention and how your foundations of influence in the work that you're doing. Whether you're a teacher or a school leader, you have to lead other people. If you're a teacher, you're leading the students that are in your classrooms. You're leading the people who are on your work team. And the same thing for if you're a school leader, you obviously have to work in leading everybody within the school community. And the third objective is that you're going to learn about how to implement change and innovation in the things that you're doing, whether, again, you're a teacher in your own classroom or working with your teams, or whether you are a school leader. You're going to be involved with educational change process, and how you innovate is going to be a key part of how successful you are in your roles. No matter what you're doing in education, you're going to have to do both of those things and working with the entire school community. So let's take a look then at the change process and how it works. So the change process is one that think about what we need to know about change. And so when we really think about change, everybody to some point is going to be a little bit intimidated about change and how it works. We get scared a little bit about things we don't know, that we don't understand. We may not always know why some of the changes are happening, and it gives us a little bit of anxiety. Some of us are going to face more anxiety than others, but it is something that all of us experience. Even if we're willing to change, it's still a little bit scary when we have to go through it. But yet, it's still going to be something that is necessary for any successful organization, especially the longer that you're there. You're going to see a lot of different changes that take place, and you're going to be part of those changes. And so you have to figure out how to make that work if you're going to be successful at your work. And if you, of course, we all want our organizations, our schools to be successful. And so every organization has to go through change at different points every year. Pretty much we set goals for our school, for our own work that we're doing, and part of those goals is about change. No matter how well planned we are, though, and no matter how well intentioned we are and how much we've gone into looking into what needs to be done, it doesn't mean much if we haven't helped others to buy in to the change process. So if you're a teacher, you have to help your students to understand why they need to buy into the change that you're trying to implement in your classroom and in your instruction. Maybe you have to also help your parents that you work with to understand the process and what's going to happen for their kids and why that's necessary. If you're a school leader, you have to help the staff to be able to understand why we need to go through this particular change, what it's going to do for them, and how it's going to help the school, how it's going to help students to grow. And so if we don't have buy-in and we didn't put in the time to invest in that buy-in, then change is not going to go quite as clearly as we wanted to. It's not going to be as intentional. It's not going to get people engaged, and probably it's not going to be very successful as a result. And the other thing that's important to remember about change is that typically once change happens and we start to do something that's new and innovative and different, and we accept that, we don't really want to go back, even though at first we might have been anxious about it and not feeling very comfortable with it. But in time, we just go, okay, this makes sense, and I don't want to go back and do something different. And so, or go back to the old ways. And so change, we adapt. That's one of the things that as human beings we're able to do. That's why we're able to survive for hundreds of thousands of years, because we've been able to adapt and change over time. So let's take a look at the theory of the organizational life cycle for change and how that process works. So the first thing that happens when we start to look at change is the process that's called unfreezing. And that is when there's some big moment that happens. Maybe it's a crisis, maybe it's a new law that is passed that causes us in a school to have to do some changes. Maybe there's some new initiatives that are happening within our school that we want to be part of. And so we've got to do things differently. And so that means unfreezing. And unfreezing just means that we're shaking off the ideas of the things that we've used in the past, and we're going to begin exploring what it is that we need to do to move forward to bring about the change that we want. Unfreezing always happens because something is forcing that to happen. It's not something that we just do. There's a reason behind it. It could be just a simple reason. For example, we want to see improvement in our students' scores on tests. And so we're going to try a different process and a different way of doing things in our classroom. Or it could be some very big thing, like I just mentioned, new laws or something like that happen that force us to have to do something different. The second stage of the process then is movement. And the movement is where we begin thinking about, okay, what did we have to do? How are we going to do that? Selecting what types of things that we need to work on as part of the change. And then also to figure out from there, how we're going to work about implementing that change. Do we go about training people? How do we get the materials, the resources, everything that we need to make that happen? So that phase is very fluid. It moves quite quickly, and it is deciding what needs to be done. Doesn't mean that that's the final decision. It just means that we're moving, figuring out what to do. Then once we finally get the process in place and we know what it is that we want to do and we've begun implementing it and it's working and it's pretty solid in terms of performing the way that we want it to, then that will bring about the third phase, which is refreezing. So that's now where the organization gets the process in place. It's solidly working. And so then that's going to become the way we do things in our organization. So maybe it's the way we do things if you're a teacher in your classroom, it's a way that we do things in the school as a whole. And so that refreezing process then is going to make that new idea become the dominant way that we do things within the school. And it will continue to do that until the process begins again. And then that's when it goes back to the unfreezing phase. So that's the arrow that's there that you see at the bottom. And it will then move through the process again. So once you've been in an organization long enough, you've seen this process develop several different times. This model is a very famous model by a researcher named Lewin, and it is the one that I think really explains the process very well in the educational change situation. So when we think about change also, no matter what change we're going to have, we're also going to face resistance. And resistance, it could come from people, it could come from laws, it could come from the policies that we're using, all from people that we work with, our coworkers, the students that we have, the parents, all kinds of people within a school community. And that resistance is going to be something that we're going to have to figure out how to work with. And we have to figure out how to break down that resistance if we want the change to work. And so the force that is needed then has to overcome that resistance. And if we cannot move the force to become more powerful than the resistance, then change isn't going to happen. Or if it happens a little bit, it's going to be very unsuccessful, most likely, and there will be a lot of problems. And so we have to think about how to bring about the forces necessary. And mostly that's going to be involved in the planning that we do ahead of time and how we communicate the need for that change in order to overcome the resistance. We need to listen to what people say when they're saying, I'm afraid about doing this, or I'm resistant, I don't want to do this, I don't see why we need to do this. So we have to help them to see what it is that why this is going to work. So listening to what they have to say and then building that into our tools to help to explain the process is going to help quite a bit. When we think about change, then we need to think about how we go about implementing it. And there are going to be some challenges that happen with that change that is going to bring about some problems. So that could be somewhat the resistance. One of the things is that changing too quickly is going to be a problem because people may not be at the same place. You might be in one place, your colleague is somewhere else, another colleague is in another place in terms of understanding about that change and how it works. And so how to go about doing that is, if it's done too quickly, then it's going to make people really nervous. It's going to leave some people behind. And you also risk not being able to do it well because we don't know what's happening sometimes. We've got to figure it out along as we go along, and it's something new. And so we've got to figure those things out. So changing too quickly just doesn't work. Somebody has their, maybe could mute their microphone so there's not feedback here. Sorry about that. Thank you. The other thing that's a challenge for change is that if we don't consult with others, we don't talk with others about what's happening and about what's needed, we may have an idea about what's needed, but that doesn't mean that everybody shares that idea or understands the need for change. And so we've got to talk with other people to see what they want and what they're willing to accept, and how we can make the change work for not only us, but for everybody within the organization. And so that consultation period before the process is implemented is going to be crucial in order to help to make this happen. But it takes time, because obviously lots of conversation is time consuming, and it's not something that's going to necessarily move really fast. But if it's done well, then that's going to help to really oil the process so that it works smoothly. Another challenge for change is that it's not exploring all the options. And so looking at, okay, what is the problem? What are we trying to fix? What are the things that we absolutely need to have in order to fix the problem? And then, okay, here's some solutions, and do these solutions address the potential things that we want to fix? And then figuring out how to implement it and what can be done. If we explore all the options thoroughly, the process will go really well, because we'll have made a good decision on what to implement, what to change. But if we didn't explore all those options, we could, implement something and then find out that, oh, that didn't really answer all the problem that we had to begin with. Now we've got to change again. And then that's when people get even more anxious and more upset, because they don't want to go through yet another change. And it just starts to seem random. And then that's when you as a leader, whether you're in the teacher in your classroom or a school leader, that's when you start to lose some credibility when things change too much, because that wasn't well planned to start with. And then the last part here is just about not allowing enough time to implement the change that's needed. So it can't be rushed. Just because you're ready doesn't mean everybody else is ready. Just because everyone else is ready doesn't mean you're ready. So we have to take some time to do it properly and make sure that we've got enough time built in to help to bring everybody along in the process smoothly at the same time. And so these are some changes that are obstacles then that are in place, certainly when we are facing change. So in terms of the school, when we look at change, it's important to remember that if a school resists, that the staff within the school, if the community resists change, and we just want to keep doing things the way they were because, well, that worked okay so far, why make a change? If we continue to do that, we're going to fall behind. We're going to fall out of date with the world around us, in the world of education, with competitor schools that are in your neighborhoods. You're not going to be up to date with them because they're changing and you're not. All of those things are going to happen. So we can't just stay the same. Even if it's working well, we have to innovate. We have to do things differently in order to improve. And if we don't keep up with what our competitors are doing, then we're going to start losing enrollment in our school, because students will leave our school to go somewhere else. That means that if it's a private school, then that's the revenue that goes with that. Those students, they're going to leave. Even if it's a public school, they're going to lose funding for student numbers because the enrollment is going down. And ultimately, that could mean the staff is going to decline also. Could be staff declines because of losing enrollment in the school, But staff could also leave because some people maybe want some changes, want to see things different, and they're frustrated that they're not seeing it, so they leave. There also is a little bit of a risk that can happen is that when things change in a school, some people don't want that. And so some of those staff are going to leave also because they're going to say, I don't like change. I don't like this new idea. When it's important enough, they're going to perhaps leave. But there's not going to be too many of those people that are going to do it. You'll have done your job to help to smooth it over so that everybody understands the process, and they're going to mostly feel pretty good about it. So not too many should leave in that way. So think about then, how can you as a teacher, how do you address change in what you're doing? And so one of the things is that maybe you embrace change by doing new lessons and new units that you're covering. Maybe you've got a whole new textbooks that you have to use, or you're trying some new ways of teaching. And so you want to innovate how you do things in your classroom. Another thing that you might do is that you're going to bring about new technologies into your teaching. So maybe you're going to explore some different ways that kids could use educational technology to enhance the learning that they're doing in the classroom. You don't have to do all of that, but there's some terrific tools, obviously, through AI and through internet resources and through all kinds of different ways, various apps that they could use that are going to enhance their learning and make it more fun, make it more enjoyable, increase their engagement, and so on. You're going to take part in school initiatives that take place. The school has certain goals, things that it's working on. And so you're going to be part of that process to help to make it smooth and make it work well. You're going to increase the engagement for your students that you're going to be working with through doing those different teaching methods that I've just mentioned, but also through improving your classroom management practices. And so you might innovate some of those, especially if you're newer into the classroom, then you're going to see a lot of different things that maybe you can improve, and that can happen quite a bit. Then as you become more comfortable with the way things are working in your classroom, you might not enhance those management practices as much. But then at some point in time, you can also help others in their career, new teachers who come to you and say, oh, I'm having some problems with this particular method. What do you do in your classes? And then you're telling them what you do and sharing, and maybe they can adopt some of those ideas in their own room so that they can improve their practice. So there's lots of ways here that teachers can embrace change within their classrooms. So as administrators, then, how you can embrace change in the work that you're doing, one of them is by implementing new and improved processes in the school. Every year, there's going to probably be goals that you're working toward, whether as an individual school or as a part of your school district that you belong to. And so how you're going to improve those processes are going to be really important. And then you're also going to be developing and implementing initiatives. So these are going to be new things. So for example, there's a goal that you have for your district or for your school rather, and how are you going to implement that? What are you going to do in your school, and how are you going to implement that within the school is something that you've got to plan and develop. So that definitely brings about quite a bit of change. You're going to hire people and train them who are going to join the school. Obviously, if they're coming in, they're brand new, so that's change. And you have to help them to adapt. They're changing also because they're changing their workplace, and they have to learn what the school is about. They have to learn how it works, and you want to try to help them to smoothly integrate into your school and into their new team. And then finally, is working with just continuous improvement cycles. Maybe you have accreditation in your school or something like that. And so how do you improve? Even as teachers, you're helping them to improve their classroom performance. And it's not just that we have started a new year and we start all over again. We are, as long as we remain in that school, you're working with the same teachers every year. And so you've got to help them to grow and improve and help the team develop and grow and improve so that they can help students grow and improve. And so it's a continuous process of improvement that happens. In other words, change, because if people are going to grow and improve, they have to do something differently in order to make that happen. Now, here is an example of something that's from my own career that I want to share with you about how I use change throughout moving from the start of my career all the way through my career, and how that has evolved over time. When I started teaching originally, and I had my first full-time teaching job, the school was going to go through an accreditation process. I was teaching in an international school in Mexico, and they asked that we work on writing the curriculum. And so I had to write the curriculum for history classes. Well, I was a brand new teacher, and I knew the content sort of, but I certainly didn't know that much about it yet. And I certainly didn't know anything about the school and its process because I was brand new to it. But yet I had to sit down and start writing the thing. It was actually written by hand. We didn't even have computers at that time. That was back in the old days. And so that was a very different process to have to go through that to figure out how that works. So I was working with another history department teacher, and we were writing the curriculum together. And then I moved to a new job several years later in the US, and that was in 98. And at that point, we were working on curriculum also. And at that time, I was asked to input the curriculum into a computer program that we were using. And it was a beta version of that program. So it was something that was being newly developed. And so we were putting it in there. The way that the curriculum worked was quite different because at that point it was all about standards. And so that was kind of a new thing. I had to learn what standards meant and how a standards-based curriculum works. So that was taking the same kind of curriculum, the history that it was using before, and now adapting it into this standards-based program, plus putting it into a new computer-based version of it. Then in 2009, at that point, I was working as an administrator in the schools, and I was working with I was a director, and I was helping to align the curriculum across all the different grade levels. I was working with the assistant superintendent, and we were helping other teachers to align for every subject area, for art, history, science, and so on, to align curriculum from kindergarten all the way up through grade 12. It's a US system. And so we were working with that and helping the teachers to develop that curriculum. So that was taking then not just the history part, but it was looking at all of those different subjects and seeing how we could integrate it vertically from all those grades, but also horizontally to make sure that within a certain grade level that kids were all getting the same kind of content for the classes that they were taking, that they were expected to take at that grade level. Then in 2014, at that point, I was working abroad again. I was working first was Korea and then in China. And there was implementing curriculum for the first time in this school. They didn't have curriculum articulated. There was nothing written for their curriculum. And so it was developing that curriculum using the vertical alignment, but it was also just developing it for the very first time and helping teachers to understand what that process is. I bring this all example of this whole change process because no matter where you are in your career, whether you're a beginning teacher all the way to working for several decades in schools, you can evolve the process and how you change working with one particular item. In this case, it was curriculum, but there are other processes that take place that you have to use as well. And so even though you might change schools, you take this process with you as you move from school to school, and you grow your understanding of that process. And if I had gone back in 1993 and I just said, no, I'm not going to make that change, I'm not writing curriculum, that's not the way I do it, then I would never have had all of these different experiences to help to make change happen, not just for the teaching that I was doing, but helping other teachers to learn how to do it so that they could help their students as well. So the process can take you to very interesting and unexpected places. Maybe you could take then a moment and in the chat window, you can add in what was a change process that you've been asked to take part in your school. Could be your current school that you're in, or maybe it was in a past school. And you could add that into the chat window to just explain just a little bit what the general process is, a sentence or so that explains what you were doing to help to bring about change in your school. Not sure if I can see it in the chat here. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at innovation and how does innovation work? So it's a little different. Sounds like change, but yet it's not. It is a little bit different. And so let's take a look at what innovation is. Now, first, change is where you're trying to work with systems and processes, and you're trying to change the way things are done. Basically, the change is a process. And the difference is that the innovation is when you're trying to improve a specific kind of either service or a product. And it's a result of the change. In other words, we create that innovation because we have to change doing something. We have to change our processes. And so the innovation comes out of that change. So when we look at that, an example then, as I mentioned earlier, change could be a new law has happened that is forcing us to have to change the way we do certain things within our schools. And an innovation is going to be that maybe we have to improve a certain kind of product or service that we have to use within the school. Maybe we have to create a new type of counseling within our school, or we have to use a certain kind of new curriculum within our school, or add a specific kind of course in the school that's going to be a required course that all students must have. And so that's the innovation, the change that we're going to implement, or the product that we're going to implement because of that change. Oh, I see now where the okay, I see, I got the chat now. I can see where everything is. So I see there's some things here, some aligning the curriculum standards, lesson plans, computer-based, uploading them onto a portal. Yeah, that's definitely a big change. When we see that, when you have to go to the computer system or learning a brand new computer system, definitely an important change there. And then using the innovation is using that computer system. That's the innovation that's used within the school. All right, so now let's take a look then at the components that are necessary in order to be able to innovate what you're doing. There's several different components. The first thing, obviously, is going to be the change. There has to be something to force us to do something differently, to go about creating that change, and hence the innovation that we're using. You're going to have to collaborate with people. You have to collaborate with your colleagues. You have to collaborate with people across the school. You have to collaborate if you're a teacher with students in your classroom or with the parents to help them to understand the process. All of that is examples of the different types of collaboration. We have to allow space for imagination and creativity, because you cannot innovate if we're not being creative. If we don't imagine the possibilities, innovation just isn't possible. And so we as school have to allow for that to happen. It's a time that needs to take place for people to come together and collaborate so that they can imagine how to do something differently. And then we have to sometimes also provide resources, which might mean money, could be time, it could be physical materials, all those kind of things that are necessary in order to be creative to figure out what to do. We have to create some new processes along the way, how to use those innovations once they're in place. If we don't create the processes, then the innovation isn't going to work. Doesn't matter how fantastic it is. And then we have to also have the resources in order to be able to implement the idea. We have the greatest idea in the world, but if we don't have the money to support implementing it, then it isn't going to work. Or if we don't have the time to put it together and to learn how to use it, then it isn't going to work. Or if we don't have the people resources in order to implement it successfully and easily within our school, it's not going to work. So all of those things are going to be necessary in order to have a great innovation and have it be successful. So here, let's think about this particular framework then of innovation. And so the first thing is we're thinking about ideas and creativity. And so we need to come up with lots of different possible ideas to work on. But obviously, we could come up with lots of ideas. We can say, hey, we should do this, or how about if we did this, or maybe we can think about doing this. Lots of different ideas doesn't mean that all of them are going to happen. And it doesn't even mean that all of those ideas are good ideas. It may not be possible to do some of those things. But we need the creativity in the brainstorming process in order to make that happen. We have to, that's the starting point. And then we get to the point where we're going to narrow that field down. So all the different ideas that are there, we've got to start saying, okay, what are the things that we can actually do? What are the things that might be successful? And so there, we want to start narrowing it down. So we have to select and develop the ideas that we want to use and figure out the people that need to be involved with it and how we work with that within our organization. All of that is going to take place as we innovate our strategies to make it work. And then finally is we're going to pick one of those ideas and we're going to implement it. And that implementation, if you remember going back a little bit earlier, takes time to be able to do that. And so we have to allow enough time to be able to implement it. We've got to train people on how to do this new innovation. We've got to figure out ourselves how it works. And so all of these things take time. So when one of you had mentioned there and about implementing the new curriculum, and you have to implement it into the new, input it into the new system, computer system, and use that takes time and to be able to figure it out. And so you learn along the way, and it's not going to go perfectly as we start off. It's going to have its bumps along the way, what's called implementation dip, because it just doesn't happen right away. And it's going, but as we learn more about it, then it gets smoother and then we will figure it out. But it does take time. So what are some of the challenges then for change and innovation that takes place in the school? So one of the things is that we don't know sometimes what to do. We know that we have to change, but we're not sure what to do. Sometimes we don't even know that we have to change. We don't know what we don't know. And so that is a problem. There may be an issue there that we're not even aware of, but yet there's something happening and it's important, and we're going to have to be ready for it, because at some point when it becomes known and we know what it is that's out there that needs to be done, that there's a problem, then we got to figure out how to change, but we don't know. And if we don't know what to do, it can create kind of anxiety. And then sometimes when we don't know what to do, we just stop. We just don't do anything at all. And so then the situation actually becomes worse, because we don't act, we aren't doing anything. And that doesn't help. We have to think about that. If we're going to look at a change or innovation in a school, we've got to find support for doing that. And we've got to balance that support. And we have to think about, how do we balance support not only for the staff who are within the school, but we have to think about it also, if you're a teacher, how do you support your students as they're going through a change? Because they're going to have some frustration with something that's new in the classroom. If you're a staff member and there's a change at school, you're going to have some frustration about what's going on. If you're a leader in the school, you're going to have some frustration because you're hearing perhaps complaints, or it's not going as smoothly as you had envisioned it doing. And so there's challenges that come because of that. If we take a change, if we go about doing a change, there's a cost to that, because it's risk. And what I mean by cost is not necessarily that there's a money amount that's attached to it, but it's a cost in other things. You take on a change, you go through this whole process, you meet and have conversations and meetings about what's going to take place. And if it didn't work well, then that's a cost, because you've lost all the time. You've invested perhaps some money, but it might be time and other resources into making this happen, and it didn't work out quite the way you had hoped. There also, if people are resisting change and they resist innovations, then, as I mentioned before, then that risks stagnation. The organization falls behind. Your classroom isn't as innovative if you aren't using some of the newer methods that have been now that are more common in other schools. We all have to do them. And so if we are falling behind our competitors, then that means that we're not going to be as successful in keeping our own students, which means that we can start losing our resources. It's going to cost us money. And if the change is a failure, then we could lose everything. If it isn't done well, then it can become kind of chaotic, and students just leave the school, families leave because they don't have confidence in what's going on. And it also can impact staff as well, who might end up leaving because they're just saying this is too much, or they want to be in a school that's changing. But if we are afraid to change, we're afraid of innovation, staff could just say, I'm not learning anything new here, I'm not moving forward in my career, and I just need to leave. And so there is risks if we don't do change well. So think about then that process and how that can work within the school is certainly very important. So now let's think about influencing the school and its school culture. So here, this is where your influence is so important, because that's going to help to make the difference in success for the change that's going to take place. There's something called the 7 S's, and these 7 S's are necessary in order to influence what's happening within a school. As a school, in a workplace, there are shared values that all of us have, or most of us in the organization share. And that's the way things are done within the organization, within our school, for example. And so there are other things that are part of that framework. There's a strategy that we use within our school. How do we do things at our school? This is the way we teach math. This is the way that we teach our students. This is the way that we encourage the whole student well-being. This is the way that we develop the well-being for our staff. All of these things are part of our strategy that we use. We have a structure within the school. So we have not only the physical structure, but there's the organizational structure, have the leadership and the various roles within the school, the employee roles within the school. That's part of the structure. There's systems that we have in place that help us to carry out the processes and the procedures that we need to do within our school. We have staff that we work with within the school. We have a certain style about how we do certain things, the way that we carry out our work, and we use certain skills along the way as we carry out that work. So all of these are the 7 S's that influence the work that we do within our workplace. And so the way that you work is also part of these 7 S's, because what you do is influencing others, people who are on your team. The way you work as a teacher influences the students who are in your room. The way you work as a principal in the school influences how students work, or how the staff work within the school, and ultimately how the students work. And if you're a head of school, the same thing. It influences everybody. So when we think about there's 2 things that are important here. There's a workplace culture and there's a workplace climate. So the culture of the school is something that is how we do things here. That's one definition of the simple definition of workplace culture. In other words, it's the things like the different assumptions that we make when we come into work every day. It's how we address the norms and the values of the people that we're working with, and whether it's the colleagues or the students, how we deal with the actions and behaviors of those people that we're working with. All of that is part of the workplace culture. And it's long lasting, because it's something that everybody shares within the school. So it's not just something that we can easily change. And that's quite different than the workplace climate. Climate is more temporary, because it's just about how people feel, and the perceptions and the meanings that they place on things like the policies and the practices, procedures, things like that happen within the organization, within your school, and how they feel about it. And so it's more of a feeling, and it can be changed, because there can be some things that can quickly be done to change that workplace climate. Workplace climate could be the climate within your classroom. It could be the climate within the school. So it's something that can be changed. So here's some example, an idea of that. If we think about workplace culture, we can have some company policies, for example, and we've got some values that those policies represent, and there's some beliefs about what they represent. And the workplace culture, we have some assumptions about the beliefs that come with that. That's the workplace climate. And all 3 of those things help to work together then to create what is the culture of the school. And that's hard to change. Maybe you can change that part, the last one there, where it's the workplace climate, but changing the beliefs and the values of the school is more difficult to do. And changing the practices, the policies, it's a little more difficult to do sometimes, and something that's not going to necessarily change the organization. So you think about your own influence and the influence of those around you. Let's think about this for a moment. If you have a boss in the workplace, and the boss is very pleasant, and they create and they're very kind, and they create a really pleasant working environment, and people are very happy, and maybe it's kind of party type of thing, and things could be very nice, doesn't necessarily mean that it is an effective workplace, a work culture. Just because people are happy doesn't mean that they're necessarily effective. If they're working, they're happy and they're just doing a lot of chatting and visiting with their colleagues and talking with each other and not really getting down to work and getting things done, then that's not very effective. But the boss is kind. But if, on the other hand, you have a boss who's a bully and they make life miserable for individuals within the school, they create an unpleasant work climate. It doesn't mean that the school isn't going to be effective. It could be still effective because people could still get their work done. They could be very effective in doing it. They might not be very happy, but they are going to be effective perhaps in getting the work done in some ways, because they don't get the work done, they know they're going to get bullied and they don't want that. And so they're going to get things done. So it could be that you have certain things that change, like, for example, the way the boss treats the people within the organization. That can change the climate, but it isn't going to change the culture of the school necessarily. So how do we go about valuing innovation in an organization? So the way to go about valuing that innovation is that we have to recognize that the level of innovation depends on the workplace culture. And so if we're kind of a little bit open to innovation, then we're going to not perhaps do as much is an organization where they're really open to trying new things and new ideas. And so, we have to measure that, how open people are to change and how open they are to innovating and doing something a little bit differently. We also have to think about if we're going to be able to promote or prohibit people from cooperating, working together, how we're going to exchange knowledge about the innovation, how we're going to share that, how we're going to help people to experience these changes as they take place, and giving them just the ideas and the creativity in order to create innovation is going to be very important in helping that innovation to work well. I can give you an example of when I was teaching and early on when there was distance learning and they brought in cameras into my classroom. And it was a very, very, very expensive camera. And I didn't know what it was. I had no idea how that worked. This was back long ago. And it was something that they didn't train us at all how to use it. They just brought it into the classroom. They said, oh, this is great. This is going to be really terrific. And didn't bother to train us, didn't show us how it was done. And so it just sat because I didn't know what to do with it. And then a few years later, I was organizing something and I decided I was going to try to use that, but I didn't know how to do it. And there had been no training, but I still tried to do it. And I figured out, and we were doing meetings that was involving several different school sites. So people were going to use these cameras to connect together. And the director of IT gave no support at all, didn't train me on it, and in fact provided absolutely no support in helping me to do this change. And so as a result, it didn't work well, and I didn't want to continue doing it again. So I never used the thing after that. And so that was a lot of money that was spent on a process that didn't work. The innovation didn't work because it wasn't supported well, and the ideas about it wasn't exchanged successfully within the school or within the school system. So it is a problem if it's not done well. So a work culture, then, if you want to inspire innovation in your classroom, if you want to inspire innovation in your school, you want to think about all of these different ideas that are here, 14 different things that are helpful to have. But it doesn't mean you have to do all 14 of these things, but you want to be able to try to put as many of these things in place within your organization, within your classroom, within your school to make it work. So, you thinking about being a future-oriented culture. Well, that's what this whole course is about, being about a future-ready educator. It's about communication, how you experiment in doing new things, how you show trust to people and helping them when they're trying new ideas, when you celebrate success, when you're looking at new ideas that are diverse, different ideas, and trying to acknowledge them, and trying to figure out how to make those ideas work in what you're doing. You don't want to get too complacent. You don't want to just say, well, we're doing good enough. Isn't that okay? We don't want to have that. We want to encourage people to grow. We want to encourage them to try new skills, to be proactive in what they're doing so that they can try new things and get ahead of it rather than just reacting to when there's a crisis moment and then changing. We don't want to see that as much. We want to tolerate people trying something new. And if they make a mistake, okay, then we learn from those mistakes and we can do it better the next time. And being tolerant is very important. Being open to new ideas and trying new things and being open to people making mistakes is important. Questioning the old ways of doing things is obviously necessary because that's all what innovation is about, because we question the old ways of doing it. And then all of that is going to help us to be able to improve what we do then in working with innovation within our organizations. So when we think about then how we influence others, then the things that we can do is we have to think about then if we're trying to influence others, everybody's going to be competing for different resources within the school. And one of the things is that there could be politics that are surrounded that. I don't mean government politics here. What I'm talking about is the politics within your organization. And so how people get those resources in order to create the change they need is going to be part of that process. Every organization has that. There's a political culture to every organization. And so if we don't know how to move through change, we're not going to be skilled. And we're not going to be able to, or we will fail in implementing that change process. So if you understand the change process and how it works here, as it's explained a little bit here, then it's going to help you in your organizations to be successful so that you don't fail. And then you want to think about, if you want to be influential and you want to transform your work culture, you've just got to do it a little bit at a time. You can't do it all at once, but you do it a little bit at a time, and it will build success. It just takes time to get there. But you don't need to expect that it's all going to happen overnight, because it won't. So here's some of the political tactics, the things that can happen within a school. And I bring these to your attention because these are things that can happen. Some of them that are on the left column are things that are positive kinds of ways that politics happen in an organization like a school. We network with other people. We're building groups of common people who have common ideas, a coalition. We're going to try to influence other people. We're trying to change some rules in order to fit new situations. We're going to try to promote success. Those are positive things that happen. But sometimes there are also political tactics that are used to still get change, but it is less positive. So things like blaming other people if things don't work out, or someone who claims credit for work that other people do instead. Or maybe the leader says, well, we're going to do this project A instead of project B, and so that we can get ahead and get a win on project A, and we'll just forget about project B. Or sometimes people don't share all the right information because politically, for some reason, they don't want to. And so they hold back info, and then you don't know quite what to do. And some of the least common tactics that are used, but do happen in a school, is that someone blocks other people from doing things, or they provide purposeful misinformation, or maybe even, unfortunately, blackmail someone to try to prevent them from doing something, from not acting. And so it's certainly true that political tactics can be used to gain support for innovation, but they can also block. But we all want to try to use the common things that are the positive ways to be able to work with but I want you to be aware of those negative issues that can happen as well, because it will prevent us from being successful in what we're doing. So now I want you to think a little bit about your task that's coming up ahead here, and what you need to do is think about your identity map. And you started this process, if you were with us last week, you began identifying goals that you wanted for 2026. And so I want you to think about those goals. Those are some new ideas that you're going to be doing. So what are some of the changes that are involved in those goals that you are doing, that you've identified that you want to work on for 2026? And are there other people that you need to have to be part of those goals? And how will you use your influence to convince them to join you in that change and helping to carry out those goals? So this is going to be part of your identity map. And then next week, in the next session, I will talk a little bit more about how we use that within this process. So I encourage you, if you are interested in if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the topics, I've covered these ideas a little bit with my book that's here, and it's available for you. If you want to have a free ebook, you just go to this QR code here, or you go down to the to the link that's below the QR code. You can then download the book and have it available. And it's not a very long book, but it's one that is a good quick read, but it will give you some new ideas about how to go about looking at the whole process of professional development and mentorship and change, and being growth minded. And that's a little bit about these topics that are just talked about today. I also invite you to connect with me if you would like to on these social media areas. So if you're in LinkedIn, or if you use YouTube or TikTok or Substack, you can use the QR codes here in order to connect with me, and I'd be happy to share with you and to have some time for collaboration perhaps with you as well. So thank you, and looking forward to meeting with you next week as well. Adeola?
Right. Thank you very much, Kelley. I guess we'll go ahead and take our 5-minute break. So we're going to have a quick 5 minutes break for you to, stretch your legs, move around. Also if you need to use the bathroom, the restroom, this is a good time to do so. And we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Sorry, that ran over just a little bit, Adeola. Sorry about that.
It's fine. If you are just joining us, we are currently on a 5-minute break. We have roughly about 3 more minutes to get back. All righty. I would like to welcome everybody right back. Thank you very much, Kelley, for that insightful session. Again, this is the Future Ready Educator Masterclass. And right now we are moving on to the next session. So Kelley started off talking about just the changes that we have to make, the mindset changes that are necessary to occur in order for change to happen in our schools, in our classrooms, in order for innovation to take place. And I'm going to piggyback on what Kelley has said, and we're moving into pedagogical precision. And this is basically talking about how we can teach for mastery, how we can teach for engagement, and how we can make sure that we're teaching to transfer that knowledge from ourselves to the students so that they can become independent learners. My name is Adeola Adekoya, and I am partners with Toyosi, and as well as a co-host with Kelley today. I am currently in North Carolina in the United States. I am an international educator. I'm a team lead. I have a lot of success with helping students grow academically, from struggling learners onto mastery to become gifted students as well. And so today, my goal today is to impact some of that knowledge and pass it on to you as participants. And we are really grateful for having you take your time out today on a Saturday to learn and to add to your toolboxes in order to improve the school environment as well as the classroom environment as well. So today, basically, it's not really about adding on to your plate. It is redefining how you think about instruction. So what you want to do is align the teaching so that it works with how the brain learns. Everything shifts when we focus on how our brain learns. We notice a difference in the results. We notice a difference in confidence, in the impact it's making on the students, and even in our own professional identity. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the pedagogical precision. We're starting off with the science of learning. And this is really the foundation of where teaching begins, because by understanding how the brain acquires knowledge, how it processes knowledge, how it retains knowledge, the foundation of transforming your teaching practice is built. And so basically, if you don't understand how the brain works, then we're going to keep on guessing. And what ends up happening is that the working memory of the students is limited. And the thing that we need to also understand is that the brain only can hold about maybe 4 to 7 pieces of new information all at once. When we overload students with information because they can only hold just so much at a particular time, what ends up happening is they are not learning. And this usually happens in a number of educators' classrooms, where the teacher is doing a whole bunch of explaining, they're over-explaining different steps, they're giving too many steps to a problem, showing the students and trying to make them understand, unrealizing that the more that they're speaking, the less learning is occurring. So an effective way to overcome this is by teaching in chunks. So here is where you want to focus on the working memory of the students. And then you build schema, which is building background knowledge for these students. And then we're going to move on from that into long-term memory. So knowing that our working memory just can hold about maybe 4 to 7 pieces of information all at once, then we're now going to use strategies to ensure that that piece of information that we're giving to the students is the necessary information that they need at that particular point in time. So instead of adding a lot of fillers, a lot of explanation, we're diving into precise knowledge that these students need. Again, this would be by giving them this information in little chunks at a time, building their schema, building their background knowledge, because by the time we do a whole bunch of repetition over a period of time, it becomes second nature to them. Then learning how to transfer this information into other aspects of the learning process. So the key takeaway is that we need to understand that cognitive overload, by over-explaining things or giving students too many steps, it actually prevents learning. So when a teacher is talking too much, you actually lose your students at that point in time. And the main thing that you want to do is figure out the precise information that these students need. And so you're simplifying your instruction, you're also structuring that instruction to make sure that it is targeting exactly what the students need in little chunks. So we also want to go ahead and ask ourselves, if we know the science of learning and the brain only learns and can only hold little information at a time, especially for our young adults and our little kids, then we want to design our lessons for mastery. So if you think about the different phases of mastery, surface learning, deep learning, and transfer learning are the different levels that you have to go through as an individual in order to master information. Surface learning is basically just memorizing and recall. Now, this is like a necessary step. It's usually the first step when the students can recall and they can repeat, they can tell you back what they have learned. But it is necessary, it's just not enough. It is not enough for you to say that these students have built understanding. Also, if you come back maybe next week, you ask the students questions, then they start looking and thinking because they can't remember. It's short term, it's short-lived in their minds. At this point, you want to move on to deep learning. This is where they're able to make connections between what they've learned on a surface level onto something else. So they're applying this learning into another aspect of the learning process. You want to build understanding and relationships between ideas. You also want them to be able to picture in their mind's eyes. You're also using different visuals at this point to make sure that they're building mental models in their mind. If it is in reading, they're making pictures in their mind so that way they can remember and they're applying strategies. If it is in math, you're giving them models so that they can apply that and also have deep learning. So say, for instance, I'll give an example, like something that I have seen in the classroom. When students are understanding, when you start off with place value, which is the basics of math, if we just tell them the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, some students would just memorize it, but they do not conceptualize what they're actually learning. So here is where you want to bring out base 10 blocks so that way they can see how you can regroup from the ones place or from the units place to the tens place. They also will start to gain that understanding, moving from the tens place to the hundreds place, gaining bigger understanding from the hundreds place to the thousands place. And if they're in like upper elementary, they can see how the relationship between the values on the left place value and also how it relates to the values on the right side of the place value. So if you're in the ones place or the units place, how does that relate to the decimal place? How does that relate? How do decimals also relate to fractions? So this is where we're talking about deep learning. Deep learning is where they're building mental models because you've actually used concrete models with them, and where they can make a relationship, they understand the relationship between one thing and the next. So by deep learning and making connections, the next step will be to transfer this learning. Transferring the learning, here is where you're applying that knowledge flexibly across different concepts, new concepts, novel problems, not something that you have been shown before and then you're repeating it, which is repetition, which is where you're coming in with the recall or the surface learning. But here is where you're given something new and you can apply that old learning or that deep learning into this new concept. By transferring, we're applying into new concepts. If students can only memorize what they're learning, then they're not applying. And then the learning has stopped early. And as future educators trying to build the students for the next big things that are happening in the world, we want them to gain mastery of what they're learning. So mastery requires intentional design by the educator in order for these students to build their learning, their knowledge beyond the recall level. Here is where, as an educator, what we're going to do is craft that learning objective that can move the students beyond recall into genuine comprehension, and then from that genuine comprehension, which is the understanding, into application, being able to apply that knowledge. The architecture of engagement. We've all been there. There have been times where, you're in the classroom and you're teaching and students are lost. You can see that some of them are compliant, which means they sit not going to disturb, but they're not actually engaged. So how do we build engagement? There is an art to it. The art to building engagement starts off with capturing the attention of these learners. And you do this starting off with something new that would grasp their curiosity, ensuring that you have hooks when you're teaching the students, and it sparks that interest that they have. One example for hooks would be, did you know? So I'll give you an example right now. Did you know that the nose can remember at least 50,000 scents, which means you can smell different things and then you'll be able to recall, I remember smelling that stuff somewhere before. Now, this one might even spark your interest more. So as adults and ladies, and this is even the Valentine period, we like diamonds. Did you know that in Saturn and Jupiter, it actually rains diamonds? By sparking our students' interest and capturing their attention, we have begun the process of engagement. So we don't lose them, we actually capture them from the onset of the learning. There are multiple ways that we can also do this. In order to sustain the focus, we need a variety of tools. If we use the same thing over and over, students get bored. And once they're bored, we've lost them. Once we've lost them, then learning is really not happening. And so in order for us to be precise with our strategies, then we need a variety of tools. We need to challenge their thinking, and we need to make sure that whatever we're teaching them is relevant in order for their cognition to remain engaged. There are multiple ways to access information. So an example would be, if you want to sustain students, if they are using paper and pencil or paper and a pen, you can actually switch it up with the students and instead say, hey, today, guess what, students? We're going to go ahead and use whiteboards and markers. And all of a sudden, you would notice like the sparks flying and the students actually working. And then they'll start saying things like, oh, this is fun. The same thing that you've been doing, just a different way to do it, adding varieties to the way that we teach them. In order for engagement to actually stay with the students throughout the learning process, we have to make sure that we are progressing through mastery. We need to also make sure that students find the information meaningful and we can connect it to their lives. If students are not thinking deeply about what we're teaching them, they're truly not engaged. We probably have compliant students. I'm going to pause right now and I want us to type in the chat box a time that we remember when students were not engaged and what strategies we used to get them back into the learning environment, back into being with us as we teach them. The students might be in the classroom, does not mean that they're engaged. If they're in the classroom, quietly listening to us, we call that compliance. They're just being good students. However, we want to make sure that they're engaged, they're asking questions, they're excited, they want to learn more. So I'll wait. Please go ahead and type in the chat box. Thank you very much. That students are in the classroom does not mean that they're engaged. That is absolutely true. All right, so Yvonne says humanities World War II, that she had to stop and sing a child-friendly song. That's a really insightful strategy. So instead of just speaking to the students, she sang. That in itself would shift the learning from their short-term memory into long-term memory. It will leave with them. The concept of whatever she was trying to teach at that moment will live with them beyond the classroom experience into many, many years. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Kelley says students hadn't done the assigned reading homework for the day's class, and so then started to do a turn and talk strategy, and all the students had to talk about specific topics. Students became more involved in the lesson. Turn and learn strategies is a very good strategy. What it does is, instead of the students being asked a question and they just think about it and answer, they get to turn with their partners beside them and then exchange ideas. It's a great way to keep the class engaged. Thank you. And which leads us to our next thing, which is active learning techniques. And so instead of us just being the ones in the front of the classroom, just talking to the students and hoping that they're learning, we're actually keeping them engaged actively. Why do we want to do this? Because the research shows that active learning strategies increases engagement and retention by 50% as compared to passive learning strategies. So if we can get the students to learn more, then why not if not? Our first would be the think, pair, share. So we're picking back on what Kelley said. It's basically the same thing, turn and learn, think, pair, share. Here is where you ask the students a question. They think on that question. They do not answer at the moment. You give them a moment to think, and then you have them pair up with the person beside them. Usually this strategy works if it is structured properly. So for instance, I would say something like, if you are on the left side of the room, you will be partner A. And if you are the partner sitting on the right side of the room, you're partner B. So that way, then I would ask the next question. If you are partner A, raise your hands up so that we are all on the same page. If you're partner B, raise your hands up. And then once students have identified who they are, then I would say, now partner A is going to speak and share their answer to the question or what they think the answer to the question is, while partner B listens. And so you give time for partner A, roughly about 30 seconds to 1 minute. And you can kind of tell when most of the students are done talking because the volume of the room starts to die down. Then you give partner B their own turn. Same instruction, but now this time for partner B. Now partner A and partner B have shared ideas. Sometimes really one partner really did not have an idea, but now that they've spoken to somebody else, now they have an idea. Or while their partner was speaking, it sparked something in their own memory and then they were able to share. Then at this point, so that's the pairing session. At this point, you then ask the class, all right, who would like to share? Another deeper way to hold them accountable, because sometimes when you ask students who would like to share, nobody really wants to share. You have them share their partner's response. So instead of them sharing what they said, this time they have to share whatever it was that their partner said. That way, we're ensuring that they're accountable. They were actively listening and actively engaged during the think, pair, share session. Here is the individual reflection, their thinking, the partner discussion where they paired, and then the whole class synthesis where everybody in the classroom can hear different responses from around the room. This is having a class that's actively engaged. Another strategy would be problem-based learning. This is when you're using real world challenges, right? And then we're applying skills that we've learned in the classroom into real world problems. Another strategy would be retrieval practice. And so retrieval practice, oh, I see comments in the chat box. Excuse me, let me go to the chat box and read them. All right, Esther says, teaching reproduction. They were so engaged asking questions about the stages of reproduction. Oluwaseun says, I stopped for a while and shared a past experience and got their attention. Then I continued the lesson. These are actually beautiful strategies that truly work. They are science-based, and this also says that we're already intentionally using the strategies that we know and applying them. Kelley says, I think I like that idea, having students talk about what it is that they're learning with their partner and then share it. Or also having them talk about what their partner shared. Thank you. So back to retrieval practice. So we're talking about active learning strategies that help to keep the classroom engaged. With retrieval practice, we can use things like, it's really low stake, things that would strengthen the memory. You can use things like flashcards. So flashcards are a good way. You can use index cards to actually create the flashcards, have students create their flashcards, and then they can revise using those flashcards, or you can buy ready-made flashcards as well. Brain dumps are a very good one. When we talk about brain dumps, this is where everything the students knows about a particular topic, you have a blank sheet of paper, they have their writing material, either a pencil or a pen, and then you give them about 5 minutes and say, everybody, write what you know about this particular topic. This is a retrieval practice that you are exercising in that moment. Students would have to retrieve this memory from their memory onto this paper. So they're transferring from their mind onto the paper. And what does this do? It strengthens their knowledge. It strengthens their memory. Concept mapping is another good strategy. And so this is where you have a concept, but you have drawings that show connection between one concept and the next concept. So you can use arrows and things like that. You can use diagrams, make sure that they're showing how the different concepts connect. So by using the think, pair, share, the problem-based learning, the retrieval practice, and the concept mapping, these are not the only active learning strategies, but these are some of the most effective active learning strategies that we can easily implement in our classroom. And if we were already implementing them, we want to make sure that we implement them more, but also remember to use a variety of strategies to keep the classroom and the learners engaged. When we teach, we want to make sure that we're teaching for transfer. And by this, we're saying, if we're teaching and explaining, that's one thing. When the teaching has moved from us onto the learner, then learning has occurred. And that's the main thing that we strive for as educators. If the learning stays with us as educators, or only with a select few in the classroom, then we have not actively engaged the entire class. There are students that as soon as you say one thing, they pick up on it. The students who are fast learners. We're not necessarily talking just about those students. We have to think about the students who need multiple arrays of strategies in order to learn. We also have to think about students who constantly struggle. They may not struggle in every aspect of of different subjects, but students who struggle to gain understanding, which means they will struggle to gain mastery. And so when we're teaching for transfer, we're thinking about the different levels of teaching for transfer. We have the near transfer, the far transfer, and the strategic transfer. With a near transfer, this is when they apply skills to similar contexts with minor variations. Here is where you're building confidence by building fluency. So say, for instance, I would use a math problem as an example. So if you have something like addition or subtraction or multiplication, and then they're just repeating it, and then they have like bare problems with multiplication, and they're able to do those are near transfer. What it does is it actually does build their confidence, and you need students to feel confident because they're engaged when they are confident. If they're not confident, you hear things like, I don't really like that subject. It's not that they don't like it, it's just they just don't feel successful in it. So we want to build that near transfer strategy, and then ensure that our students feel successful and that they're engaged, they're happy, they're enjoying the learning process, and they start getting really fluent with the learning. File transfer is more of conceptual knowledge and relationships. So here is where, they're adapting to new situations. So an example would be, for example, if students know how to multiply, now you're asking them to apply that skill in order to find the area, which is multiplying the length and the breadth, or length and width of a particular thing, or they're transferring that knowledge to find the volume. So here's where they're, if it's a rectangular prism, then they're doing the length, the width, and the height, which is the length, the breadth, and the height. And so this is called far transfer. So we've talked about the near transfer and the far transfer. Strategic teaching is explicitly teaching abstract principles, and then the students then use this knowledge that they have applied and they're fluent with in the near transfer, and they have applied into the far transfer, and now they're strategically applying it in practice using different examples, using different contexts. So without the teacher having to say, hey, this is what you need to do, the students try to figure it out, and then they retrieve that memory because now they are fluent, they're confident with the particular skill, and then they're transferring it to other aspects. And we have to understand that transfer does not just happen. It is intentional. It's intentional on the part of the educator for the students to learn how to transfer that skills. We have to be intentional about how we design our instruction. We have to be intentional about how we model the learning process, which is the lessons. We have to be intentional when we are creating our lesson plans, and that's what would determine that transfer taking place. It would not happen by itself. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens when the educator is deliberate in ensuring that that knowledge is transferred. Here is a clear science-based lesson plan framework that works no matter the subject that you're teaching. That would work if you are a leader in the school environment and you go into a particular classroom. You can use this as, a checkbox to see, are these various aspects of the lesson plan framework, are they being met? If they are being met, how? What is the evidence that you can see that this is being met? What is the teacher doing? What are the students doing? How are they showing that all the different aspects of the lesson planning framework is shown or is being met? So the master template is a systematic approach to designing impactful learning experiences and is grounded in cognitive science. By following this framework, what usually happens is the teacher actually does feel confident because they also use backward design in order to create the lesson plan. The first step would be to define the learning goals. What is it that you want the students to be able to do? What is it that you want the students to know? So what are they going to understand? And what are they going to know? It's basic. So students can, and then you fill in the blank, can identify main idea, or students can use key details to identify the main idea. And so if they're able to use the key details to identify the main idea or to determine what the main idea is, and then show you what key details led them to understand the main idea, that means that this clear learning goal has been met. That means that lesson was successful. It also tells you that the students were also really engaged in the learning. The next part would be, so the clear learning goals, they're straightforward and basic. Add prior knowledge. By this, we mean that you're going to connect what students already know. Something about, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the learning. It could be something about outside of the learning that you would use to connect. Why are we doing this? Because by building that schema, they're able to make connections from what they know outside of their learning to the learning environment. It also makes it seem relevant to the students. The next part would be to design active engagement. We've already talked about a few active engagement strategies. So which of these active engagement strategies would you implement into this particular lesson that you want to teach? How will students actively process the practice? Are they going to use the think, pair, share? Are they going to use whatever strategy it is that you want them to apply? And then you would have them, you'll go ahead and plan for transfer. How are they going to apply their learning into new contexts? So they've learned these things in the past. How are you going to have them apply that particular learning into a new context without you having to hold their hands and say, this is what you need to do, by them being masters of what it is that they're working on? And then finally, at the end of the lesson, how are we supposed to know that these students have learned what they're supposed to learn? How are we going to check for understanding? We do this by assessments. It could be a quick formative assessment, an exit ticket that has just one question that students answer. So that way you can see if there are any misconceptions, if they got the learning, if they've mastered the skill. By using formative assessment, the formative assessment should clearly tie in with the learning goal. By following the process of this lesson planning framework, we can actually ensure that we're transferring the knowledge and actually ensure that the classroom is engaging for both the students and as well as the teacher. Because when the students are learning and they're happy, the teacher feels like they've done a great job. So now, just thinking about re-engineering our instruction, and as we come closer to the close of our sessions, we have to think about transforming traditional teaching methods and using science-based principle, not just doing things because we know that that's how, well, it's always been done like that. This is what we've always done. Just similar to what Kelley said, that as innovations come, we have to start learning these innovations, even if they're uncomfortable, into making sure that we are applying science-based principle. As the world is changing, we have to actually modify the way that we teach and modify the way that students learn so that we're actually preparing our students for this 21st century. We talked about reducing cognitive load, so chunking the content, because we know that our brains can only hold up about 4 to 7 ideas at a time. So anything that's extra information, over explaining, we want to cut all of those out and chunk that information into precise learning so that teaching and the learning is done with precision. We also want to make sure that we're using aids strategically, not just showing them pictures and showing them examples, but strategically using it to make sure that we cement that learning. We want to also increase the retrieval practice. What do we mean by this? This is replacing rereading with active recall. So instead of just having students just reread something, we can give them short quizzes. We can give them flashcards. We can have them practice problems. That way they're actually retrieving the information that they have, in their memory and applying it to the learning. We also want to use a variety of examples, a variety of contexts. So by presenting concepts through multiple lenses, we can promote flexible understanding. This means that our students don't just understand in one way, but they can be flexible and apply it here, apply it there. And that way we have this engaged learners. We have this critical thinkers. We also are building problem solvers. These are the children of tomorrow. They're going to be the ones to determine what our nations are going to look like. They're going to be the ones to determine what the community is going to look like. So we actually want thinking people. We don't want people who are just yes and no people. We want people who can challenge different things, who can problem solve, who can start something out of nothing. While we are also teaching, we want to make sure that we provide timely feedback. We're not waiting 1 week after a worksheet has been turned in order to grade it, because by then you've moved on to another concept. You want to make sure that right there and then, or at least sometime in the moment, whenever possible, you're given specific actionable guidance that directs the students towards mastery. So for instance, if a worksheet has 10 problems, we want to make sure that we're roaming the room. We are not just sitting in one spot, but instead we're walking around the room, we're checking what students are doing. You watch their work as they work. Basically, if you see that by number 4, a particular student is getting all these question wrongs, there's no point in them doing the rest because they will get it wrong. You want to stop them at that moment and do a quick feedback or re-explaining. If you then see that there are multiple students who are not able to do the work while everybody else is working, you can pull those students into a small group and then reteach or guide them through the steps. By guiding them, it means that you're asking them questions. It can be guided practice whereby they're doing some of it and then you're prompting them on what to do for some of it as well. Just different strategies to make sure that they're successful and different strategies to make sure that they are engaged. The implementation roadmap. So our path to mastery, becoming master's educators, is not a big leap that you have to make. You want to start small, measure the impact, and then scale what works. So the question would be, what one technique am I going to implement immediately? You don't want to take 3, 5, 8 new things and say, I want to start all of this. Usually that's like excitement. It might work one day, but it's going to fall flat. If we're going to keep on building ourselves into this mastery of education, then what we want to do is implement a little at a time until it becomes part of us. So what one technique would you implement immediately, starting this week? I want you thinking about what you're planning to do for the upcoming week. Which techniques are you planning to implement? So on a monthly basis, you need to also check what is working out of all these techniques that I have implemented and what needs adjustment. And here is the last part. We need to build community. We cannot keep our knowledge to ourselves. Like what we're doing right now, we're sharing our insights with colleagues, we're sharing our insights with you. So we want to make sure that we're sharing with other people. And by that way, we're inspiring people. And then they're also sharing with us. And so they're inspiring us. By doing all of this, we're building a better school community. We're building better learning community. And we're also making great names for our schools and ourselves as well. And the big picture to that is our students walk away as better critical thinkers. So identity shift. I want you thinking, what version of me who teaches, the version of me that teaches with precision does not do what? So we know that version of you is not going to lecture for 45 minutes and hope that students are going to get it, because we all know that hope is not a strategy in education. It's not. We have to be precise. All right. We cannot rely on methods, the same thing that we've been doing year after year after year after year, without reflecting on it. And then we have to think of ourselves as educators who are building ourselves. And you're doing a very great job by coming into this masterclass to gain more insight and more knowledge. And we're grateful for that. So the educator I'm becoming in 2026, who is that educator? If you will just take a moment to type in that chat box. Are you the educator who designs learning experiences grounded in cognitive science? Are you the educator who prioritizes active engagement, who focuses heavily on mastery and transfer, Because we know that great teachers are not born, people are not born great teachers. Great teachers are built through deliberate practice that's guided by science. All right, so it's your turn. Can you please put in chat box what is one takeaway that you're going to apply as an educator next week? It's one takeaway. We talked about reducing cognitive load in at least in our lessons. We talked about active retrieval practices. We also talked about incorporating active learning technique. And then we also talked about designing lessons for transfer. At least commit to one change, one thing that you're going to do. So commit to one change. You need to also measure its impact to see if it's working, and then you're going to build on from there. You have one change and you see that that's working and you've mastered that and it's working in the classroom, then you can add on to your toolboxes going forward. And at this time, we'll go ahead and take any questions as well. Type in your responses in the chat box. We're coming to the close of our session. Also, we want to tell you about our YouTube channel where you can actually watch the recordings from this session and last week's session as well. Okay. So I see prioritize active engagement rather than compliance, reducing cognitive overload. That's an interesting idea. Want to develop that further in my work. That's awesome. A deliberate teacher that uses different and engaging strategies to ensure that learning takes place and include active learning techniques. Thank you so very much for joining us. We appreciate the fact that we are all learning and growing, and that you have taken time out of your busy Saturday to join us and to add to your toolboxes. And as you learn, please make sure you're also sharing with your colleagues as well. And you're also checking that your students remain engaged in the learning environment. And thank you so much. And this right here is I will use think, pair, share strategy. Awesome. Real easy tool to use, nothing extra that you have to really do, but it's just a mindful way of asking questions. Definitely share the knowledge again. Thank you, thank you, thank you so very much. Thank you. And to my esteemed colleagues that are here, Toyosi and Kelley, thank you for such a wonderful session together as well. Here is our YouTube channel. It is EduSphere Global Learning Limited, and there you can find learnings from the recording from last week as well. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Adeola.
Thank you. Improve my teaching and cognitive
Thank you, Adeola.
skills.
Well done.
Thank you. And I will stop sharing at this moment. Right, and with that, we have come to a close